Hi there, my name is Tony Harmer and welcome to this session on photography editing tips and tricks in Photoshop, where you can save some of your photography using the amazing powers of Photoshop, and nearly all of my photography using the amazing powers of Photoshop. Just in case you've never met me before, I am a LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com author, also ex-Adobe. So used to work on some of the products that you know and love and advise people on how best to use them. And hopefully we can do some of that in this next 20 or so minutes of this session. We're going to start nice and straightforward and very, very simple, and then we will gradually ramp it up from there. So let's go ahead then and dive into Photoshop, where my first tip for you relates to actually cropping and straightening. It sounds really straightforward. It should be image 101, of course, but it's not for so many people, really isn't. I see so many great pictures, even from people with really quite good reputations and social following and all of that sort of thing, who have slightly wonky pictures or pictures that aren't quite framed perhaps as they best might be. Okay, so what I'm going to do here in Photoshop with this particular image, okay, is I'm going to tap C on my keyboard, which gets me through to the crop tool. Now, if you're seeing a different tool, it's probably because it's another member of the family that you've been using. So you can always long press on that in the toolbox to see the other members of the family and which one you have. And here's a tip. When you have got things that have a family that share the same accelerator key, you can always use Shift plus that key to cycle through them. So if I hold down Shift here and tap C, you'll see that I move through all of those tools like so. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is, before I do any cropping, is I'm going to go ahead and come up here to this straighten icon here in the toolbar, and then I'm just going to draw a straight line. I know, mad, right? Here we go. There's my straight line. Now that's actually telling me that is minus 0.1 degrees out. Amazing. My photography is never normally that level. Okay, but if I hit that, it will straighten that for me automatically. Now I'm ready to go about my crop. So what I'm going to do here is preserve the original ratio of this image. So if I go ahead here and go to original ratio, that means I can basically drag the corners and the sides and it will keep those proportions, which is handy. But I'm still not ready to crop. No. What I'm going to do here also is make sure that delete cropped pixels is unchecked. That means it will hide them but won't remove them. Okay, and I'm also going to add in content aware, and you'll see why very, very shortly. The one final thing I'm going to do, right, is just go here and check my tool settings to make sure I'm showing the cropped area here, and then to my guides. Rule of thirds is on by default, but just so you know, you've got all of these other ones you can use to help you achieve a decent composition. So not a lot of latitude here really at the moment, because this line here is actually the bank of the river, is what I'm referring to here, is actually kind of low in the image really, but I'm going to see what I can do about that. So first of all, let's go ahead and crop in from the side just here. Now the tree is getting very, very, very close to the top there. I'm going to move that over slightly like this, and also, okay, I'm going to move this down just a bit like so. Now you might notice that the right hand edge here is showing me some transparency. Not too worried about that just at the moment, because that's where that fabulous content aware option comes in. So if I now hit enter or return or hit the big tick at the top here, so many choices, and even right click. If I do that, you'll see that it then calculates that, and then it goes ahead and calculates a content aware fill. Now, sometimes you have to get in there with something like a clone stamp or a healing brush, okay, just to make a small modification there, but I think that is a pretty good job. Now, some of you, I know how eagle-eyed you are, probably why you take photos, right, are looking at the top here and going, what's that thing in the corner? Firstly, life is too short to worry about those things, but what it is when I cycle through the different tools in the crop family, I hit the slice tool, and that's what that did. And that goes back to the bad old days of web when we cut things up. So we can get rid of that really, really easily if you ever see it by going to the view menu here, okay, and down to this option in the show menu, slices, turn that off, and it's gone. There you go. Like I said, life is too short. Right, so there's cropping and straightening. That's us started at 101 beginner level. Super, super good. Fantastic. What we're going to do now is we're going to pick another tree-based image. These are basically from outside in my backyard, pretty much here, by the way, these two. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pick up this one just here. And my crop tool is still engaged, so I'm just going to tap V here for the move tool there, like so. And I'm then going to add a levels adjustment layer. Now, I could do Command or Control if you're on Windows, L, like so, to get the destructive levels dialog, but I'd rather not, actually. So this is another thing that people do. They do that, and then they have to keep a safety copy of their image. Just go ahead and use the adjustment layers. They've been there for a long time. We should all be used to them by now, those of us that have been in the business. And if you're new to Photoshop, go ahead, meet the adjustments here. So this is the icon I'm going to choose here, this histogram. I'm going to click on that, and I now have a levels adjustment layer. And this is the first thing you should do with many, many images here, just to get a full spread of tones in your image. So looking at this here, you can see that the histogram starts just a little way in on the side there on both sides. This is the shadows on this end, on the left-hand end. This is the highlights on the right-hand edge just here. So what I'm going to do is go, first of all, to the shadows. Not that there's any particular reason I know of why you would start in the shadows, but I do most of the time, and I think most people do. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and then just drag that in like so towards the beginning of that histogram. Now, I don't know how well you can see it. If I go a bit further, okay, you can see that I've got lots of pixels there that share those particular brightness values. That's essentially what we're looking at here. And I'm going to back that off so I'm affecting as few of those as possible, like so. Okay, just a few more than perhaps is really necessary in this particular case, because all of the shadows are down in the bits of grass just there. And immediately I've got a little bit more pop in my image. If I just turn off that adjustment layer, you can see how it's fairly flat. Turn it on and it's just a bit more contrasty. So again, I'm going to go to the far end now. For the highlights, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and click and drag that in. And you can start to see pixels appearing just there. Again, I'll go too far and then back away like so. So I'm just getting a few of these. I don't want to blow anything out here. Okay, so I end up with any forms of banding. And I'll stop at that. And again, I'll come down here and turn off. Okay, that layer and on again. So you can see it's got some nice contrast here. Let's just Command or Control 0 that to bring that up to the screen. Now, another thing you might want to do is change the balance between those two. And here's the way I think of that. I imagine that I am looking at a tray that has had some sand dumped on it, and I'm looking at it from the side. Okay, so I'm seeing that in profile, and the tray is balanced on 3 stones. Okay, so there's one on either end and one in the middle. And the question I ask myself is, if the 2 end stones were yanked away simultaneously, would this board balance? Okay, would this big weight of sand on the left-hand side be balanced out by what is on the right? I don't think it really would. So what I would do is just move that to where I do think it would balance. And you might have noticed just there, just that tiny, tiny creep, okay, of brightness appears. So if I turn that off, here's how it was before, and on again, then now you see how it is. Perfect. So that's another thing that you can do. Now I'm going to keep this image open here as I am with all of the others, because I'll be popping back to them as we go on, but we'll leave this one here just for now. Next, I'm going to go to one of my old stomping grounds. Now, full disclosure, I did not take this picture. It is a stock image from Adobe Stock, but I wanted something that had better res than when I actually lived in that part of the country, which is about 11 years ago now. There we go. So what I want to do here is just kind of bring a bit more drama into this with a nice new sky. And here's how I can do that in this version of Photoshop CC 2021. I'm going to go up to the edit menu because this is a new edit. And I'm going to come down and choose sky replacement. Now, after a brief moment or two while the image is analyzed, you can suddenly see now I've got a whole new sky here. Now, I do have some tools in this dialog on the left-hand side here that you can see. I've got a brush, so I can brush stuff in and out. Okay, I've got some navigation tools as well, and a bunch of other controls, so I can make adjustments if required. I've also got access to a load of different built-in skies. These are ones I've used recently on the top here, but there are lots of folders of skies that I could choose to use here. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and click this plus and add my own skies. So if you've got kind of like a folder or two of skies, I know I do, then you could go ahead and load those in. Let's have a look in spectacular here and see what we've got. Wow, some of those really are actually spectacular. So you can see how quickly that changes. Now, I know also how cynical some of you are when it comes to all things Photoshop. So what I'm going to do here is cancel out of that for a moment because you've seen that work. And I'm going to go back to the trees image here. I'm going to go to the background in this particular file. It's a JPEG. It is at the moment until I save it. Then it will want to be a Photoshop file, which is great. Okay, because that way it preserves that adjustment for me. I'm then going to go back to that edit. Okay, and I'm going to choose sky replacement just here. Okay, the image will be analyzed and you're thinking about all the trees, and look at that. That's not too bad, is it? Not too shabby at all. Now I can get in and use these controls, and just so you know, you don't have to click on this little slidey thing here to do it. When you hover over any of the words here, like Shift Edge, you will see that your cursor changes to what I affectionately call stapler accident finger, because it looks like someone has had an accident with a stapler. You could also call it tiny weightlifter finger as well, because some people think they look like tiny bars of weights. But what that means is, when you see that, is you can click and drag in either direction from that point and change the value. So for example, if I now press down and drag to the right, you can see that that edge is shifting. Now you're going to start to see a little bit of a halo growing around some of the trees. In fact, this is growing into the trees just there. Okay, there's the halo on the side, and then the trees start to get thinner and thinner as the edge grows, like so. Okay, so it's easy for me to change those things. I can also change things about the edge, so I can go ahead and fade the edge if I want to here, change the brightness, the temperature, the scale of the sky. So let's go big sky, like so, or big edge there. Okay, and then some adjustments to the foreground, because when I click this and choose to output this to new layers, it will add a bunch of layers. And taking a look at these are masks on the side here. You'll see there is the sky, and it's masked off by the contents, all analyzed by Sensei, the artificial intelligence I was going to say the invisible intelligence, but it kind of is invisible. It's there, the artificial intelligence inside of Photoshop. You'll also see this foreground lighting layer just here. So there's some fun stuff gone in there and a mask that deals with that. If I turn that off, look at that. You can see what happens there with the trees, and turn it on again. And that's all fixed for you. Okay. And then there's this foreground color layer. If I turn this off and back on again, you can see that it has successfully toned the foreground there to give you this complete illusion that that sky was present at that time. And I think that is fantastic, and it can save a lot of pictures just there. Anyway, moving on, here's another thing that happens sometimes with images that I noticed. This is one of my dogs. I've got 2 Labradors and a miniature Dachshund, and 2 cats and a rabbit, just so you know here. But this is Roxy. Roxy looks a lot older than she actually is because she's been on medication for most of her life. But you can see here there are tiny flecks in her fur, and there's a little bit of hair just poking from her nose just there. And those things are distracting, so do fix those. Now, if you tap J on your keyboard, that gets you to the healing family of tools, in which there are a number of different members. But the spot healing brush doesn't require any interaction from you other than using it. You can change the brush size in one of a couple of ways, well, 2 or 3 different ways actually. You can use the brackets on your keyboard. That's what some people refer to as the square brackets rather than the parentheses, which are above the 9 and 0 keys on the keyboard. These are normally to the right of the P key on British English and American English keyboards. You can additionally, on a Mac, hold down Control and Option, and then click and drag left to right to change the size of the brush, and up and down to change the hardness of the brush if you want to. And if you're on Windows, that is an Alt-right drag to do that same thing. So this brush is just a shade too big here, but I'm going to go ahead and click on some of these specks like so. And you see they get healed very, very quickly. And there's a few there, but as you can see, just moving around and clicking between those is not exactly like going down into the cold, dark earth and fetching back coal. It is very, very simple indeed. And just here over by the nose, I'm using a fairly soft brush, so I'm going to go into the nose just a few pixels, click and drag outwards, and that's sort of gone just there. I might need to work on that just a little bit more to get that right. Now, additionally, if I just zoom in here, okay, like so, we can see that I haven't done a great job of that. So a couple of separate things, and actually the hair goes right the way across the nose. And there's another tool I could use for that. I could use the healing brush tool. Now, the difference with the healing brush is that you need to specify where the source pixels are coming from. So if I hold down the Alt or Option key here and click to sample, some of you will be thinking, oh yeah, that's just like the clone stamp tool. And you know what? It is just like the clone stamp tool. And then move down underneath. Okay, you'll see now when I do this, when I paint, okay, with this, and you'll see I'm doing it in short bursts, which is another thing that people do in Photoshop. They try and do too many things in one go. I'm just going to change also here to the aligned mode, which means where I sample, if I option click now, you'll see that the plus above it, that's the crosshairs where the pixels are coming from, are actually aligned to where I'm working. So that's another thing. It takes just moments to go ahead and use either of those tools really to click and sort out all of those different blemishes there, but your photography will benefit as a result of doing that. Quite as how far you go, of course, is entirely up to you and what you're doing. I'm not too worried about some of these here on her muzzle and so on, but the ones here on her forehead there and on her ear, they are distracting. So I get rid of those ones. What about when you've taken a picture because something to your amazing eyes looked really, really impressive and you thought, oh, I don't know what it is about that particular thing, but I want to photograph it. such as this fallen submerged tree, which again is just around the corner from me in a small piece of water there. But I kind of like the fact that this moss growing on it and all of the other stuff is almost like a miniaturized landscape. And at some point, I will get myself some waders and get in there and get really, really up close to some of this stuff. It's just an interesting structure, but you might not be feeling the same way about this photograph right at this particular moment. Okay, you might be thinking, yeah, it's a picture of a log in the water, but that's because there are other distracting elements around the side. So how can Photoshop help me with that? Well, here's how I think this one will help me, and it's using some very, very targeted blurring. So when I do this kind of thing, I typically turn the thing that I'm working on into a smart object first. A few different ways you can do that, and just in case you don't know what one is, it's kind of like an especially encapsulated version of your original file. There's loads of different things you can do with them. Now I can go ahead and right click here and choose convert to smart object. I can also go to the layers panel flyout menu and choose convert to smart object. I can also go up to the layer menu and I can come down to smart objects and choose convert to smart object. And I could additionally go to the filter menu, okay, and choose convert for smart filters, which will then gives me the most amusing dialogue in all of Photoshop. Actually, let's do that way because it is kind of funny. When I do that, it says, to do this, you need to convert it to a smart object. Ooh, so there you go. There's another way. If you think Photoshop engineers are paid by the user interface element and you're worried that they might not be getting enough money, choose that option because that way you get to additionally click OK. Great. Now we've got a smart object. And just so you know, I've actually reassigned one of my keyboard shortcuts to do exactly that because I do it so often, but you could look into that separately. So now I have a smart object. What I'm going to do is go up to the filter menu and I am going to come down to blur gallery just here. Ooh, there we are. And I am going to choose field blur. This is especially made for me because I took this picture in a field. That is a lie. It's just called field blur because it blurs a field like so. Now, here in the middle of the screen, I'm actually going to move this widget out because you can grab them by their center and move them out here like so. I've got a widget here with which I can control several things about this blur. The first of which is its position, right? So I'm going to take this one over to these very, very distracting elements on the side here. And then using the outer ring, you can see here if I click and start dragging on that, I can change that. I am going to go blur bonkers on that. I'm going to blur that to, I don't know, nearly 40 on there. Crazy, 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 crazy. There we are. And you might think that has done nothing for that image. Yes, it has. What I can also do is add more fields. Now, if I click here on the subject that I want to preserve, what I can do is wind that back. So that area is not blurred at all. And you can see that as I move that around, things suddenly pop into focus. Now, I might decide that I want the end there, and I also want another one of those at this end as well. Okay, which will keep people guessing on how I took the photograph at the very least. Now this one here, I want to make sure that this is blurring in the right direction. And here's the trick. If you want to use this, and indeed most of the other things, if not all, from the blur gallery. If you hold down the M key, that's M for mother, just there, you can see exactly how that blur is being calculated, like so. All right, just moving that around like that. And so I can see the blur field just there. Great stuff. Just going to release the M key. Okay, and there we are. We've got that particular thing there. I've accidentally added another. I'll just tap M again to just get me out of that. And if you've got a field that you don't actually want, just target it and hit delete and it's gone. There you go. So that might help with some of those. What I need to do now is click OK at the top. right? And when we go back into Photoshop, because we were actually in sort of a sub application just then, okay, we can now see that we've got blur gallery there, which means we can click on that or double click on it, okay, and it will take us back into the blur gallery so we can make changes just there. Let me just bring that in, Command 0, Control 0, like so. It's amazing stuff. Right, so other things that we can save. Well, we can save things. Let's go for maybe this North Carolina sunset just here. Again, this is a stock photo. I haven't been to North Carolina recently, or indeed at all, as far as I can recall. But with sunset pictures, something I tend not to take very much of. I do sunrises, but sunset pictures, and indeed some sunrises, can almost all benefit from a little bit of color balance love. And what I'm going to do here is go for my adjustments, and I'll go to color balance just here. I'm then going to push this towards red because it kind of will be warmer, and then push towards magenta and push a little bit towards yellow. You can also balance that out with a bit of blue if you want to, right? But you'll see there how warming that up like that, really, really easy. Epic looks in just seconds. Complete change from that. Like I say, do experiment with moving the blue slightly towards into the blue there and more into the magenta. Okay, play around with those things. And of course, you can tune that just a tiny bit using the cyan to red balance as well if you want to. So that's something that we'll save with those. And I realize now that most of what I've done here has been landscape based. So let's very quickly then go into this image just here. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to go ahead and just give it a little bit of a glow. Now you might find tricks that say create a copy of a layer, blur it, do all of that stuff, and then blend the layer down. Here's a much, much quicker way. I am going to convert this to a smart object like so. That is step one. I'm going to go to step 2 now, which is go to the filter menu, come down to blur, and I'm going to choose Gaussian blur just here. And you'll see if you have that low numbers, not doing a great deal, have it at high numbers, going super, super bonkers crazy. So somewhere in between is right. But you say, well, my image might be different. How do I know? Well, you're going to get the answer to that in a second. Okay. Or the strategy rather than the answer. I'm going to hit OK. So now I've got that blur, but it's applied to a smart object, which means at any point I can double click it. Okay. And go back and adjust it. So I've got lots of latitude just there. But the important thing here is not applying that filter. It's these two tiny slider icons on the side here. If I double click on those, I get access to the blending options, okay, for that effect. And if I change this to like overlay, you'll see suddenly that's heaps more contrasty just there, or soft light, slightly gentler. And I can also back that right the way off here using this slider and then sort of introduce it there to get to a point where it's still relatively realistic, but it's got that nice punchiness and contrast to it. Amazing. There we are. So that's one of the things we can do with that. Finally then, going back to one of the files we've used just here. In fact, if I go back to the trees file here, and I am going to actually grab all of these things here above the background, okay, and just delete them like so. Whoops, a daisy. I know I'm running out of time, getting stuff in my ear telling me time. There we go. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to turn this into a smart object like so. I'm using my keyboard shortcut to do that. Oh, actually I'm not, because I've reassigned it. So I'll go ahead, or I'm using a different set of shortcuts here. So I'm going to convert this to a smart object like so. I'm then going to go to the filter menu and come down and choose my bestest friend here, the camera raw filter. You don't need a raw image for this. Okay. It's using the power of raw. And if you're used to Lightroom, then this will be an immediate best buddy for you. You can just work ahead on one image here, and there are very few things that are off limits. I've got a bunch of profiles here, so you can see color profiles, and I've got loads of different things to choose from. Just hovering over them will actually give me an idea of how that's going to look. So profiles are fantastic because unlike presets, they just start the interpretation. They don't change anything with any of the sliders. I'll hit back at the top here. I'll go to basics, and what I'll do is I'll warm this up just a bit like so. In fact, I've got some green in there, so let's kind of just not go too far with that one. I can change the exposure, mit mein friend stapler accent finger, the contrast. I can then get right down into the weeds with the nitty gritties, with the highlights and all of that good stuff. I can add some texture. Now this is a bit misty, this photograph, and clarity, okay, combined with dehaze will actually bring me some of that goodness back. Can you see that? Watch the haze in the trees at the back there. Whoom. I've got many, many more controls, and it's something for you to investigate. But there you go. If I just hit OK on that, again, it's easy for me to go back, so I can just double click there. Hope you've enjoyed my session. Hope you enjoy the rest of the amazing photography show. And I hope that next time we're all seeing each other in person. But for now, big love and peace to you all. See you later. Bye.